This is a story about an old neighbor of mine. Me and my husband and two young kids moved into an old fixer-upper house back in the summer of 2015. I was in college full-time, and my husband had agreed to stay home with the kids until I graduated, and we would slowly work on doing the house keep-up. Anyways, it was situated in a very small, sleepy village in the countryside in Ireland. Everyone knew each other, and everyone knew your business. We had a neighbor, Johnny. He was a loner. The only living family member he had was a brother named Thomas and had no friends. He was an old heavy drinker, but I still had a strong suspicion that he drank heavily most nights, and he was a clean freak. Well, the outside was immaculate. His grass was the greenest, softest grass I ever saw, and nobody could touch it, or he would come outside yelling at you to get off of his property. He had expensive garden statues, and it was like a lawn out of a fancy magazine. Inside his house was dark and filthy. The floor tiles were black with dirt, and his ceiling was yellow from smoking indoors and never opening windows. His appearance was always unkempt, and he had bulging eyeballs and a demeanor of someone about to explode with rage. The day we moved in, he walked into our front garden and introduced himself in a rough way. "I'm Johnny. I live next door. I've been living here 66 years, 8 months, and 21 days. Who are you two?" Me and my husband thought he was a weirdo from the get-go, but were polite and explained we just bought the house and planned to make it our family home. Then, he said nobody should have ever bought that house, that it was his late sister's house who died many years ago when she was a young woman. We were taken aback by this, but said sorry to hear. He then turned and walked away, but stopped abruptly at the gate and said in a rage-filled voice, "I cut the grass every second day at 10 a.m. I take care of this lawn and mine. Don't ever touch the grass." Okay, sure, we said, not really thinking he's actually going to be serious about this. We live here, I'm sure he would just let us cut our own grass, etc., and we laughed it off. Turns out he was very serious. Every morning at 10 a.m., we would hear his lawnmower start up, and there he was, cutting the grass whilst muttering angrily, looking around wild-eyed. My husband often went outside and told him, "Hey, it's okay, I'll do it," but Johnny would continue as if though he couldn't see him. Johnny was also a hunter. He had 2 dogs he would bring with him, and he also owned a hunting shotgun. This freaked me out as guns are rarely seen in Ireland, especially to be in the hands of someone so unstable. Then the really strange stuff happened. We were clearing out the attic upstairs. We had all the trash to dump in the front garden, and Johnny storms into our garden yelling, "What are we doing?" He marched into the hallway and said to never, ever go near the attic. My husband got annoyed at this point and told him to leave us alone. It's our house and we'll do what we want. Johnny freaked out, screaming his dead sister's clothes are up there and all her belongings, even her old-fashioned bicycle, and never to touch them as they're not ours. Needless to say, we ignored him and put the stuff outside and told him if he wants them that much, that he can take them into his own house. He stormed off and looked back at us, laughing maniacally. He freaked me out, but my husband says he's just some weirdo and not to take notice of him. The next day, the rubbish removal company were due to come and collect the stuff we decided to dump. We were surprised to see that pile of old belongings was untouched all day. The following day arrived, and when we awoke, all the belongings were gone. No surprise as to who took them. 2 days later, we didn't hear his lawnmower. We didn't so much as see him for 3 whole weeks. Then one day, while my husband was out of town, I was alone with the kids, and they wanted to go outside to play soccer. We went, but discovered all of their soccer balls had kitchen knives stuck in them. Needless to say, I got freaked out and called my husband, who said to call the police, but I didn't think there was anything that they could do. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, terrified Johnny was behind all of this. The next morning, I went downstairs early, and there Johnny stood in his backyard at around 5 a.m. It was still dark outside, and it was raining. But there was Johnny yelling, "Don't touch her clothes, Tommy! Don't look at me with that sinful stare!" Again, I was pretty unnerved and felt like I shouldn't be seeing this, so I tried my hardest not to listen as I went to the living room. Later that day, I heard Johnny starting up his lawnmower as I was in the backyard with my best friend, who decided to come and visit for the day. Johnny saw us both in the backyard and stopped in his tracks. "You didn't tell me you had a sister." "Oh no," I said. "She's not my sister, she's my best friend." Then Johnny yelled, "You can't fool me. Wait until I tell Thomas what you tried to do. He won't be happy." Then he stopped yelling and stared right at us with his bulging eyes, and in a very eerie, calm voice said, "It's clear she's your sister. You have the same flesh." And he walked away, muttering angrily. We were both really freaked out at this point, and my husband was due home soon. We decided to both walk to a nearby store to buy milk, and as we did, a neighbor from across the street approached us. She explained that Johnny was a shady character and the house we bought was, in fact, his late sister's house, but she hadn't just died all those years ago. She had been murdered in a very brutal fashion. She mentioned nobody had ever been brought to justice as it was so long ago, and nobody was ever suspect in such a village. Everyone except Johnny, she said. Nobody trusted him, but he apparently was questioned by the police and released without charge. I mentioned his brother Thomas, and she looked bewildered and said Johnny has no living family, and he never had any brothers at all. I was totally freaked out by this information and hurriedly rang my husband to tell him. He agreed Johnny was dangerous, possibly mentally unstable due to some undiagnosed medical issue like schizophrenia or something, but he made him uneasy, especially as we had young kids. The next couple of weeks involved Johnny yelling at Thomas some more and smashing plates off the floor every night, screaming, "Eat your dinner, Thomas, for God's sake! I'm cooking it all day! How dare you refuse?" My husband said we would just ignore him and he might stop. My husband also bought his own lawnmower to take care of the grass. One morning he was just setting it up when out of the corner of his eye he saw Johnny staring at him through an upper-story window. He could hear him muttering angrily but couldn't make out what he was saying. That night, things escalated. The kids had a sleepover in their friend's house, so we decided to paint inside and do some light renovation work. That night there was a series of long, hard, angry knocks on the door. It was Johnny yelling and spit flying from his mouth. In his hands was his shotgun, clutched so tight his knuckles turned white. "I told you! I warned you not to touch the grass!" As he said the last words, he kicked the front door down. He stood in our hallway, reeking of alcohol and cigarette smoke. I genuinely thought we were both going to get shot. My husband tried to talk to him, but it was no use. He was getting angrier and angrier until he just absolutely stopped, stared straight ahead looking past us and said, "I need you to bring me home. I don't feel well." I protested, but my husband said to call the police, so I did. They took it very serious, seeing as there was a gun-wielding maniac in my hallway only moments ago, and now my husband had agreed to walk him just as far as to his front door, not leaving my sight as I stayed on the phone to the police. As Johnny opened his front door, my husband said he caught a glimpse of the hallway. The walls were covered with yellowing newspaper clippings of the death of his sister, hundreds of them. He even had crude drawings my husband couldn't make out. My husband literally ran and jumped the wall dividing our homes. When he did that, he walked on the grass. Johnny came out with his gun aimed right at him, and just as he did, 2 police cars showed up. Their timing was remarkable. Johnny had to be tased twice but was eventually overpowered, at the time yelling he didn't kill her, referring to his sister. The court case is still pending, so I changed his name for obvious reasons. He's being investigated for his sister's death as there's now breakthroughs with DNA, and he's still aggressive and manic in jail apparently. Keeps saying Thomas will die without him, who will look after Thomas. His house now lays empty and unloved. The once manicured lawn's now overgrown and wild. It has a creepy feeling about the place, and the newspaper clippings still remain on his hallway wall. It was Halloween night, and my friends and I dressed up as the Scooby-Doo gang. We were all girls and a little too old to be trick-or-treating in 7th or 8th grade, but my friends convinced me to come with them since they needed a 4th member to complete the group costume. I agreed because, hey, free candy. We left my friend's house at 7, and it was already pretty dark. I wasn't familiar with the neighborhood at all. My 3 friends all lived in that area near one another, so I was just following their lead. We hit a good amount of houses and had traveled a pretty far distance. Though I didn't know it, we were in a totally different neighborhood that they weren't familiar with either. No one told me that though. We reached a 1-story house with overgrown bushes and Christmas lights hanging. The lights were on and there was a pumpkin on the porch, so we rang the doorbell like any old house. An older man, looking to be about 60, opens the door with a big smile. He gives us tons of candy, like handfuls each, and my naive self thought he must know one of my friends. This wasn't a crazy idea. A lot of the neighbors we visited were family friends of my friends and gave us big helpings. As he hands out the candy, he starts a conversation. "You guys are older kids, huh? What are you going as, Scooby-Doo?" We all replied yes. "What? Do you guys have a party later tonight? Gonna drink? Smoke?" At this point, I'm sure he's family friends with Shaggy because she laughs and says yeah, and I figured it's all a joke. As we turn to leave, the man calls us back. "Wait, since you are all older kids, I have something saved inside. You know, the big kid decorations. Come on, take a look." He placed his hand on my back and began pushing me in. That's when it clicked. This man is the guy my parents always warned me to avoid. One of my friends yells at the man to stop, that we have to be home now and we don't have time. My other 2 friends have already sprinted off the porch. As I shuffled off, he called out again saying that it was a shame. Maybe next time. Just thinking about it makes me shudder. Afterwards, I was in a bit of shock from what happened. I felt that the worst part of the whole situation was I had to dump my candy out, since my friend warned me there might be razor blades in one he gave us, and he gave us handfuls. My friend told her parents, but their reaction was extremely underwhelming. They asked for what house it was, but they were drinking and relaxing. I don't think that anything ever really came of it. I should make it clear from the beginning, I have not always had the best taste in men. We'll get that out of the way now. After a split from my husband and being hit on by the worst of the worst, my friends and I thought it would be funny for me to sign up for Tinder as a social experiment of sorts. At least then I could control the men who talk to me as well as provide my friends with hilarious screenshots. I will add, Tinder isn't as bad as I met my fiancé on the app. You win some, you lose some. I met a man named Jason who seemed intelligent, witty, and had a successful career. After talking for a while, I agreed to meet up with him for coffee. I hate coffee. He was attractive and seemed very attentive. It was a nice date and we made plans to meet up again for sushi. The next week, we met for sushi and after what I thought was a good date, he suggested that we went back to his apartment to watch some documentaries. I'm a sucker for documentaries and he did not seem like a serial killer, so I agreed. As we sat on his couch, he turned on an obscure documentary about some musician from the 50s, which I was fine with, but I noticed that he kept staring at me. Now, attention can be flattering, or it can be downright creepy. Unfortunately, his attentiveness fell under the latter category. After a few minutes of actively ignoring his staring, he, completely out of nowhere, said, "Can I taste you?" I've always been a fan of serial killer documentaries, and I was pretty sure this may have been one of Dahmer's pickup lines, so I politely declined and broke out of there. At the time, I was creeped out, but chalked it up to a good failed Tinder date story. And here's where things get really weird. He soon asked me out on another date, and although in my mind I wanted to scream, I would rather be waterboarded than spend more time with him. I politely explained that due to going through a divorce, it just was not good timing and I wasn't truly ready to date anyone. We were not friends on social media, so I didn't think it was a huge deal. A month or so later, I met the man who I would eventually become engaged to, again via Tinder, and didn't give a second thought to Jason. After a few months, there were pictures of my now fiancé and I on Facebook and Instagram. Around this time, my fiancé, who I will call G, received a text message from a strange number claiming to be one of his female friends. It was a very strange message as she basically went ahead and propositioned for him to come over and hook up. He knew this was out of character for this friend, as she knew he was dating someone, so he immediately messaged the friend and asked if she had sent the messages. She of course had not, and he didn't think much of it. I owned my house, so after about 6 months, G had moved in with me. His friend fell upon hard times, and we were welcoming to her and to our house to stay until she was able to find an apartment. She began receiving messages on Instagram calling her an ugly troll and making various other disparaging remarks. Around this time, we had noticed a white car had been sitting outside of our house periodically. I live in a very rural area, and there's no parking on the street. About twice a week we would see this white vehicle, and at first I thought it may have been my ex-husband or someone that he knew. Again, it was not a good split. Maybe a month later, G received a message on Instagram telling him he would never be good enough for me. He was a terrible boyfriend, and that if he hurt me, this person would hurt him. He sent me a text message from work asking if I had received any strange messages and let me know something kind of weird had happened. I let him know that I had not and asked what was going on. He sent me screenshots of the messages, and I noted that the person who had sent them was also following me on Instagram. I looked at the profile, and the only people he followed were men who commented on my photos or females who followed G. Once I knew about all the messages received from both G and his friend, I started to panic about the white car that would watch the house. We literally live across the street from a cornfield. There is never any reason for anyone to be sitting outside of our house who we don't know. After all this came to light, I couldn't think of who might have created a fake profile to bully people who I was involved with, but I saw even the fake name was Jason. When he explained the strange text message and his friend divulged the messages she had received, I was still struggling to figure out who may be doing this. I went through all my social media, and on Snapchat, I found that Jason was following me. I had never given him my last name, so I'm still not sure how he was able to find me. He was the only person who fit the situation, and the rude messages continued throughout the day. I knew that Jason worked as a tech developer and would have the know-how to create a fake number and seek out my information. On top of going through a nasty divorce, I also have 2 small children. As soon as G sent a message to Jason conveying that the police would not be happy with someone harassing a woman with 2 small children, all messages and communication stopped. This encounter happened when I was about 7 years old. My sister and I had invited our neighbor, who was around our age, to come over for a movie night. To give you some idea of my old neighborhood, this is important to the story. The neighborhood is pretty old, so the houses aren't far apart or super close like most neighborhoods are these days. It's also very hilly with tons of trees. Her house was beside my driveway, less than a 2-minute walk to her front door. Anyway, after about 2 hours of pizza, Scooby-Doo, and girl talk, it was about 11 o'clock, so we decided to walk her home. As we started walking towards her house, we noticed a black truck parked at the end of her yard up by the road. Nothing odd since people park like that all the time. Right as we all stepped off my driveway and into her yard, a huge hooded figure stepped out from behind one of her trees in her yard. We froze, not sure if we were seeing things or if it was a real person. After about 30 seconds, we started backing up, trying not to lose eye contact with the figure. That's when he started walking slowly, getting faster with every step. By the time we hit my driveway, he was stepping onto hers. We booked it, sprinting for the door. He also started running at this point. All of us screamed, ran into my garage, and locked the wooden door behind us. Our screams were so loud that my mother and grandmother heard us and met us at the door. At this point, all 3 of us were freaking out, trying to explain to my mom and grandma what had happened. We told them that a man had chased us. My mom called my friend's house to see if they saw anything outside. My friend's grandma said they didn't see a truck or a man. My mom ended up walking with us this time since we were all too scared to walk alone. My friend's grandma told us that what we saw was the pizza man. Even in my 7-year-old mind, I knew that was a lie. What pizza man hides behind a tree? Also, the only other car was the truck, which didn't have a pizza place logo anywhere. About 2 years later, we found out who the hooded man was. It ended up being my friend's 45-year-old uncle who was a known addict. Apparently, he was super out of it that night. According to her grandma, he just wanted to play a prank on us. But I highly doubt that was the situation. It was winter of 2015, and I was working at a doctor's office in Branson, Missouri. I had just gotten a new iPhone and was excited to try out the time-lapse mode for its camera. On my drive home from work one early evening, I decided to stop and capture the sunset over Table Rock Lake. It was a gorgeous evening, and the winter sun would be setting soon. I parked my SUV at the State Park entry point parking lot, and mine was the only car in sight, but that didn't alarm me. I hopped out and realized how incredibly chilly it was. It was sunny, but blistering cold. I opened the back of my vehicle and put on some gloves and a better pair of shoes, and then I took off down the trail that led to the edge of the lake. I'd noticed that Branson Belle showboat slowly making its way across the lake for its sunset voyage, and I thought it'd be neat to capture it in the time-lapse. I was a single 31-year-old female with a lifetime of experience doing risky things on my own without consequence. The path down to the water was marked with large rocks on each side. I was in a hurry to get down to the shore and get into recording position. I lost my footing and fell down hard. My head rested on a pointy-shaped big rock that I think would have knocked me out had I not managed to literally stop the impact at the moment we collided. My knee and one of my hands stung badly. It suddenly hit me how stupid this was because no one knew where I was, and I nearly incapacitated myself on a vacant trail in freezing temperatures, with it being minutes from dark nonetheless. As I sat there recovering from my fall, I decided I was close enough to the shore and I'd just film right where I fell. I was about to find out that falling down was the least of my worries. "Can I borrow a light?" I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned around and there he was. He was standing about 20 feet behind me. I replied to him that I was sorry, but I didn't have a lighter because I didn't smoke. "I saw you getting out of your car up there. You got a real nice bottom." Where had he been? There seriously wasn't a soul in sight when I parked and I headed down the trail. This next part you might find hard to believe because I myself still cannot grasp that there are people out there like this, but in his fourth sentence to me and within less than a minute, he said, "You want to get busy?" I knew I was in a lot of trouble. No one would hear me if I were to scream. Sure, the Branson Belle was out in the water, but it was several football field lengths away, and I'm sure I was invisible to them. They wouldn't hear me over the sounds of the massive ship anyhow. Without missing a beat, I told him that it was too cold to do it outside, and we should go to my car. I pretended to be interested. In my mind, I just knew I needed to get off this trail before the sun went down, and obviously I'd abandoned capturing the sunset. I don't recall all the things he said during the walk up to the parking lot, but when he asked if he could touch me during the walk, I happily agreed. I knew it was a test. I still wasn't 100% sure if he was going to let me make it off that trail, and anything I could do or say to please him on that walk was my ticket out. How had I gotten myself into this awful situation? God, I was stupid. Just please let me make it out of this, and I swear I'll be smarter. He kept his hands on me for the rest of the walk back. We made it to the parking lot, but much to my disappointment, I was still the only car there other than a vehicle that wasn't parked in a real spot and hadn't been there either. I knew it was his car. He'd been hiding and watching me, and then he pulled up to the trail entrance and left his car at it before he began following me. You may ask why I didn't call 911 on the trail. Well, he was watching my every move, and I wanted to make it off the trail unharmed and alive. I figured it being below freezing was a good excuse to refuse to do whatever he wanted to do out there on the trail, but please him by promising to do it somewhere warmer. Unfortunately, the parking lot was far enough off the regular highway that passing cars couldn't see it. My next mission was to make it to my own vehicle and escape. We were standing by his car, and he continued saying things that he was going to do to me that seemed too graphic for me to write about. I was still playing along. I tried to get his name and number out of him, but he refused both. Why would someone refuse to give me even their name? He began unzipping his pants and trying to get me to do things, so I insisted we walk to my SUV. First, though, he grabbed something out of his car, and I never got a good look at it, but I'm pretty sure it was a handgun. We walked across the parking lot towards my car. I pushed unlock, knowing that only pushing it once would unlock the driver's side door. I had my keys in the ready position. I jumped in as he was attempting to open the passenger door, threw it in reverse, and backed up as the tires spun on loose gravel. Then I put it into drive and floored it. I was too afraid to look in the rearview mirror. I called 911 and gave them his description. Oddly, he was a handsome enough guy, stood about 6 foot tall, blonde hair, brown eyes, and medium fair skin, a slightly muscular build and nice features, probably around 25 to 30 years old. You wouldn't look at him and think anything remarkable or otherwise. I wasn't ever in a position to see his license plate, but I told him about his car. He drove an older, probably early 90s pale blue car. It reminded me of my great-grandmother's Oldsmobile. I didn't even have a first name to give them. After taking down my information, I never heard from anyone regarding my report again. I may never know what exactly he has done, but I do know that I sensed the presence of absolute evil that evening. So this happened when I was 18 and my last year in high school. My school was located in a boring residential area. It is actually a pretty wealthy neighborhood, but it didn't appeal to teenagers looking for stuff to do, and this is important to the following events. Me and my friends usually would go to a store and buy cheap alcohol in order to get wasted while walking down the streets. Not proud of those days. If we had the energy sometimes, we would go to this park of sorts to get some privacy. We were always worried to get caught by the school and have our parents called. They said the park had basically 3 layers. It had a lake at the center, in the middle a running field and woods enveloping it all. We would obviously get in between the trees and begin to party. We were out of the school's reach and we didn't have to worry about anything, except some occasional park staff and some weirdos lurking by, but we were never in less than 5, so probably not. Surprisingly, this is not a drinking regretful story, though I have many. I just wanted to get it clear that I didn't have much places to go or private stuff at that time. My options were very limited. This became a problem when I got my first girlfriend. It was already pretty awkward just existing in front of each other, even worse engaging in all the processes of making out, especially inside the school buildings where everyone could simply catch you in the act. So a simple, "Hey, let's have a date at the park today," was the perfect solution. Immediately upon our arrival, we started to search for obscure places. As we found one, we got to our business. It was going quite well, even though we had to occasionally stop due to people getting close while passing by. In one of those situations, we heard some footsteps and immediately stopped. After they ceased, we got back to kissing, but then I decided to open my eyes and look around a bit. Yeah, I'm one of those. Only to see a weirdo statically looking at us from about 15 meters away. I suddenly stopped and stared back at the guy, hoping he would go away, but he didn't. Instead, he waves and starts walking towards us. As he does it, my mind is flooded with the until now forgotten memories of people saying how shady that place was. Stuff like deals, stalkers, and people up to no good. After the awkward walk in our direction, the guy starts talking to us. He looked like he was in his mid-40s. He was bald and wearing a regular outfit. He looked like that everyday man you see in the street but can't remember the face. My girlfriend and I were clearly nervous. The man pulled something like, "So, hey there, having a good time, huh? I myself used to get here with some cuties back in the day." Then he proceeded to ask information like where we live and where we study, a pattern in these situations apparently. I lied, saying we were from the neighborhood, but told the truth about our school. He continued, "Really sorry to interrupt, but I just couldn't go without telling you that the park patrol usually passes by here this time. If they caught you, they're probably calling your school." Fishy, no doubt, but then he made a suggestion. "You know, I know quite a place around here. Use it myself sometimes. Come on, I'll show you." And then started walking, signing for us to follow. Yeah, I know you probably would have had the balls to stand up and go away, but for us, it was so sudden and fast that we didn't know actually what was happening, so we just followed the creep. The realization that we messed up came at the middle of the walk to the place, though. We were silently panicking. After non-literal centuries of walking, we finally arrived at the place. It was a giant concrete pipe in an isolated playground, apparently used like a tunnel by the kids. The guy said some more nonsense about his glory days and finally left. I remember starting to think that the guy was just extremely weird, but with actual good intentions since he actually left. I was not putting our lives at stake, though. As soon as the man disappeared, I told my girlfriend we had to go. She quietly agreed. She was very introverted and quiet. Even so, this time I could see why she was extremely uncomfortable. Before leaving, I had this feeling that the creep might still be around, so we hid in a bush and waited. Boy, was I right. Almost instantly after we hid, the guy creeped out of a tree and stealthily approached the playground. We freaked out. We were in that classic scene, covering our mouths, looking through the bushes. We thought he saw us since he was approaching us, but apparently he didn't. As he arrives at the playground, he starts peeping at the big pipe. When he finds no one there, he leaves again. This was the moment when everything made sense. He lured us into this isolated place to get us in the act. But why, though? What would he do if we were there? We were not staying there to find out, so we rushed to go away. At the beginning, we were just fast walking, but then the guy spawned out of nowhere in front of us and asked why we were leaving. I didn't even let the guy finish his sentence and said, "We gotta leave." Then we started running till we were far enough away. It was a very weird experience. Till this day, I really don't know what the intentions of that creep was. I got back to the park sometimes for various reasons. It's a popular place to hang out, and thankfully never saw the guy again. But I never saw this patrol he alerted us about either, so I assume he really was up to no good. During the time this took place, I was a short girl with light brown skin, long curly hair, and, to my shame, a woman's figure. I was barely 13 years old and had just moved to another area in my state. To my dismay, this dropped half of my credits. I was struggling in my last school, though, and my parents heard great things about what we'll call Green Valley Junior High. The school went on a weird schedule compared to my old one. It was the same 4 classes each day depending on the semester, and it was huge, 2 giant floors and at least 1,000 students. My first day was easy, of course. New students, so everyone was trying to enlist me in whatever clique first. You know how it goes. Fast forward a week, and I'm friends with these 4 girls now: Channing, Jessica, Brooke, and Madison. Of all of them, I definitely look back now and single out Madison as the ringleader. She was thin, blonde, and pretty, but bossy as all get out. I thought she was cool and wanted to be liked by her for some reason, but felt closer to Channing, who was a brunette and pretty in her own right, just chubby. I only had 1 class each with Jessica and Brooke, so I barely saw them in school. Channing and Madison, however, were both in bio with me at the end of the day. Because of them, it quickly became my favorite class. Our teacher, Mr. Parks, was a factor in this too. He was always friendly to the 3 of us and always put us on group projects together so that we were never separated. He was happy I made such good friends since I was new. Madison sometimes would spot him looking at us and joke around about kissing in front of him. I didn't think much of it because honestly, she just said stuff like that. She was the cool bad girl, so to me it wasn't a surprise. I just laughed it off. Still, it was weird the way she would look at him, with that flirtatious sparkle in her eye. She was obviously crushing, and he was kinda cute, just way too old for us. Once I swore I saw him wink and grin at her, but she said he had something caught in his eye when she asked him about it. Later that night, we had our moms drop us off at Jessica's house, who was having a slumber party for making A's and B's all year. I was excited because it was the first one I had all year. The night started out fairly normal. Dinner with Jessica's mom, makeup, music, and a movie. Then, after Jess's mom went to bed, things heated up. Madison snuck some vodka from her dad's liquor cabinet and packed it in her bag. She took the half-empty bottles out of her pack and invited us all in to drink. I didn't want to, but I did because I didn't want to look lame in front of Madison. No one did. The party resumed, although later on I felt tipsy and Madison had started vomiting. This scared Jessica, who didn't want her mom to hear Madison going back and forth to the bathroom because she would get caught. She suggested we take her phone and call her brother to go pick her up or something. Her brother and her were really tight and cool with each other, and also disposed of the bottle. Brooke and Jessica would sneak Madison outside for her brother to retrieve her after Channing called him, and I would sneak out back to hide the vodka bottle where it could never be found. Seemed like a solid plan. We waited for Madison to stumble back to the bedroom from the bathroom, but it took forever, so Jessica had to go help her. She was toasted. While she was gone, Channing scrolled through Madison's phone to find her brother. Madison then got a text from someone that read, "I can't stop thinking about you." Channing whispered to me and Brooke that Madison had a boyfriend and she was hiding it from us. Needless to say, we started snooping. Then things got weird. The guy talking to Madison was apparently in class with me, her and Channing, but never spoke to us. Guess he was really secret. We scrolled past some other romantic messages they sent like, "You complete me. I would do anything for you. And you're the most beautiful girl in the whole world." Really sweet stuff. Maybe one picture of Madison with makeup on was sent too. That's when I saw something that made my stomach drop. "You should totally kiss your new friend. That would be so hot. I might even raise your grade to 100%. Maybe you can try to touch her and send me a picture. No one's as beautiful as you, babe, but to see that would drive me crazy. You know that." I tried to hold the scream in. When Jessica came back, she laid Madison down on the carpet and we showed her too. Jessica took the phone straight to her mom, who called Madison's mom. We all got in trouble for drinking after Madison was picked up, but Mr. Parks was immediately reported. I didn't see Madison at school again. Apparently she transferred. Mr. Park was labeled on the offender list and locked up for 15 years because he had pictures of Madison and two other girls around 13 to 14 saved on his phone and private laptop, and also because Madison admitted that they had done things but never went all the way. This happened this afternoon, and I instantly thought of these stories. Now, this isn't just a "he looked at me funny" story, so bear with me for a minute. So it was about 1:30 and I decided to get some lunch. I thought that Subway sounded perfect, so I got my wallet and walked out the door. The Subway is a 5-minute walk from my house and is a row of about 6 to 7 shops, one of which being a local shop called Spar. It's a chain in the UK. So before getting my delicious sub sandwich, I decided to walk in and grab a can of Coke. As I went to walk in, another man did also, so I politely said, "Sorry mate, after you." He replied, "No, go on lad, it's alright." I thought this was nice enough, but how he was dressed should have been an indication of what was to come. He was shirtless and wearing a St. Patrick's Day plastic hat in the middle of summer. Anyway, I accepted his offer and walked in first and made my way to the fridge. Now as I did, I realized he was still right behind me, like within touching distance. I just assumed that he was going that way too and moved out of his way in case I was blocking him. I wasn't. He stood there looking at me. So at this point, I walked around the shop trying to lose him, but wherever I went, he followed. He finally said something. "Do you even know what you're buying, lad?" He continued to follow me, slurring indecipherable things at me. I then walked towards the staff, and as I did, he said, "Buy something. I'll kill your whole family." What? I walked to the staff and told them, "I don't know this guy. He's just following me." And as they were talking to him, I walked away as he was distracted. They asked him to leave, and I told him I was just a kid and to leave me alone. I'm 16. He got angry and annoyed that he couldn't see me and shouted, "Where's he? Tell him to get his money out and buy something. That daft idiot doesn't even know what he wants." I stood out of view for a bit while this continued, and while he left, I walked to the counter and the staff told me that he comes in sometimes to, ironically, never buy anything but is always off his head on something powerful. Afterwards, I bought my Coke, thanked the staff, and promptly left. As I left, I saw him coming out of one of the other shops. I busted out of there and walked the other way until he was gone, and then got my Subway. The sub was great, but I hope I never see that guy, and whatever he was on, again. My mom and I decided to go on a weekend trip to a city that's a popular tourist destination about 3 hours from where I live. We got here in the late afternoon, checked into our Airbnb, ate dinner downtown, and then decided to walk around. We were walking around the downtown area when I became tired, really full from dinner, and said I wanted to find a bench to sit down. Mom said to keep moving and thought she looked unusually tense. I found a bench in a square park area where a few police officers were standing around a squad car parked nearby. My mom seemed to relax a bit and we sat down. About 10 minutes later, I suggested we get up and go back to our car. My mom said, "Earlier, a man in a purple shirt seemed to be following us. Can you look around? Is he still there?" I looked behind us, and maybe 3 yards away to the left was a guy in a purple shirt, just standing. I said, "Yeah, he's still there." My mom suggested we get up and quickly walk back toward the direction of our car. We went back down to the downtown area, which was also pretty busy and crowded with a lot of people. As we walked, I looked behind us, and the man was looking directly at us and following us, keeping a distance. My mom and I tried to think of how we could lose this guy and ended up going into a nearby bar. Once inside, there happened to be a few police officers at a booth. We decided to tell them our suspicions and asked them to walk us to our car. The cops were really nice, and 3 of them walked with us. We apologized in case it was nothing, but they said, "If you felt something wasn't right, then it probably wasn't." I'm glad my mom was paying attention to our surroundings because I may not have noticed the man. At first I thought my mom was being paranoid, until we stood in the park for the exact amount of time we were there and started walking exactly when we left, not to mention the fact that he was looking directly at us. I shudder to think what he may have been planning to do if he got us alone. Be safe, everyone. It was the summer before my 8th grade, and I believe I was 13 at the time. That summer, my mom had been invited to an alumni picnic for her university. I, being the rebellious teenager I was at the time, was in a foul mood about being forced to go and was huffing and rolling my eyes the entire way. After arriving at the picnic and surveying the food and venue, I deemed it not worthy of my attention and sat at a secluded table. Mistake number 1. About half an hour later, people began shifting from drinks to the main dishes. They were set out in buffet style. Feeling hungry, I made my way over to the buffet line. There was also a barbecue set up where a guy was flipping patties and taking requests. I decided to go for the barbecue first since there were less people waiting compared to the buffet line. I have a very outgoing personality, so I like to smile at everyone. When it was my turn to order what I wanted, I looked up from my phone, gave the guy flipping patties my brightest smile. Mistake number 2. He smiled back and then proceeded to say hello and ask me how I was. Things he did not ask any other person before me. After responding and returning the courtesies, I grew more and more wary of him. He was overly nice and attentive of me and gave off a bad vibe overall. Deciding that I would attempt to avoid him for the rest of the night, I returned to my secluded picnic table and began eating while reading a book that I brought. Not long after, I hear rustling behind me, and I turn around to see the creepy dude from before behind me. I'm immediately alert and also filled with dread. My hopes that our uncomfortable encounter would end with the burger interaction died. He approaches me and asks what I'm reading. The guy then proceeds to strike up a conversation with me, asking me mostly about school. Although his questions weren't extremely invasive, they were meant to keep the conversation going so he could continue talking to me despite my impartial replies and clear disinterest. At this point, I'm fairly sure that he is not just some guy who is overly friendly and likes to chat. I mean, he looked like he was approaching 30, and I was just barely 13. I made it my purpose to stress that I was entering the 8th grade, but that seemed to fly over his head. Finally, one of the guys who was from the same catering company called out to him, and he left. I breathed a sigh of relief and decided it was best to go somewhere else. The university is located in an extremely safe city, and since I basically grew up on campus, I knew the layout very well. Knowing that I could find my way around and back, I ventured to a nearby fountain where I proceeded to sit and continue to read my book. I had been immersed in my book for probably an hour when I heard someone call me loudly by my fake name. It was the Creeper. I had given him a fake name because, being overly paranoid and cautious, I was afraid that I was going to get stalked or worse. My heart drops and I turn around to see him in a golf cart, but the ones for carrying stuff on the back, I'm not sure what they're called. I hesitantly wave at him. He drives closer to where I'm sitting and asks, "Do you want to go for a ride?" In that moment, my vision was flooded with red flags. I very quickly said no, and told him I was happy just reading my book here. He asked again and I replied, "No, I don't know you at all. I don't think it's safe." He kept insisting that he was just going to go to the cafe on campus, where the event had ordered catering from, to pick up some water and fruit and that it'll be short. He told me that it would be much more fun than sitting there reading. I think we're probably there for at least 10 minutes with me saying no and him relentlessly insisting. I was getting pretty annoyed at this time and my resolve was wearing. Being a kid who liked to see the best in people and situations, I told myself reluctantly that it's an extremely safe campus with people. I should be okay if I just stay alert. So I finally relent and say fine. However, before I got onto the golf cart, I decided to say very seriously while making direct eye contact, "I know karate. I will not hesitate to defend myself if you try anything." Funny thing is, I don't know karate at all, but he looked thoroughly caught off guard. He kind of laughed and said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to do anything. I just want to show you around." The ride to the cafe itself is very tense with me sitting at the very edge of the seat. He asks me more questions about myself and I give him one-word replies. We get there safely and I breathe a sigh of relief. He goes into the cafe and asks if I want to come inside. He says that there's a lot of snacks and food and I'd be free to grab whatever I'd like. My brain screamed red flag and I politely declined and waited outside as he stocked up. On the ride back, he grew more bold. He began talking about himself and told me that he has a girlfriend. What? And that he was planning on marrying her. About 30 seconds after he told me that, he looked at me, smiled, and told me that he absolutely just loves Asian girls and that they are just beautiful, like me. I am thoroughly creeped and disgusted and feeling extremely bad for the girlfriend, if he actually has one. He makes more comments on my appearance like he's done all day. "Wow, you were just so beautiful." We finally get back to the picnic venue. I say thanks and I'm just about ready to jump off and speed walk back when he turns around from the wheel, puts his arm around me and says, "Thank you so much. This was great." He then puts his hand on my thigh and rubs it a bit and then squeezes hard. I was wearing shorts since it was summer, so his hand was right on my bare thigh. My stomach flip-flops and my heart races. I manage a small smile that probably was actually more of a cringe and hopped off the vehicle and literally ran back to the venue. 4 years later, I attended the same alumni picnic, thinking there would be no way in hell that they would cater from the same place. I was wrong. The same guy who took me for a ride and subsequently rubbed and squeezed my thigh was there flipping patties again. He recognized me faster than I recognized him and smiled in that leering way. Needless to say, I got out of there quick and never went back. A few years ago, I, a female, lived in my car. I was fresh out of college and overwhelmed with student debt, and being young, dumb, and 21, I thought car living was a good way to save money. I live in Southern California, so the rent is high and the weather is temperate enough to make this possible year-round. One night I decided to park in a neighborhood I thought I knew well. It was right by the beach and a couple of blocks next to an ex-boyfriend of mine, so I felt safe there as I had walked the streets at night plenty of times. I parked, locked the doors, hung up the curtains so no one could look in, plugged in my earplugs so the cars passing wouldn't wake me, and fell asleep. No, my earplugs were effective but terrible, and I could always count on them falling off in the middle of the night. I actually preferred this because it meant I could fall asleep but still hear my phone alarm in the morning. It was about 2 a.m. when I woke up to my earplugs already having fallen off and something feeling wrong. Odd scratching noises were coming from the window. It started at the passenger side door, then moved to the back seat doors. I froze, unsure of what to make of it, painfully aware that I leave my windows slightly cracked at night for ventilation. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I stayed frozen, trying to make sense of it all. That's when the flashlight turned on, and some idiot unmistakably shone his light in trying to find a crack in the curtains, and to my horror, he found one and shone it right where my face was. It's hard to explain, but the position of my head made it so I could piece together what was happening based on the light everywhere, but he couldn't see my eyes. The scratching then continued, and I knew I was done. This went from potential attempted car theft to someone knowing I was in the car. For clarity, I had up these psychedelic curtains at the time, very eye-catching and hard to miss. Stupid, I know. I got black curtains immediately after this incident. This is why I suspect he knew I was in the car the whole time. He just put two and two together. Also, I don't know for sure, but the scratching noises sounded like he was trying to shove something in the cracks of my window and grab the door lock, but failing to gain any traction because they were barely cracked. During those times, I slept with a bat and mace by my seat, but I was literally paralyzed with fear and couldn't will myself to grab them. However, my last year of college, I took a class called RAD and remembered the number one rule: yell confidently and confrontationally to any assailant. I wish I could say I screamed something hardcore, but what left my lips was a loud, aggravated, and forceful, "Excuse me?" Like I was Link yelling at the Princess of Hyrule in that terrible TV show. It was super lame, but it echoed. To my immense relief, I hear the sounds of his footsteps running away at top speed, but I kid you not, the guy was laughing as he ran like it was some stupid game. I was still paralyzed, but eventually him running gave me the courage to get up, grab my bat, and shove my way to the front seat where I started the car and sped away. I didn't see him, and I spent the night at a friend's house. I live in an apartment now. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized I had parked 1 block away from a bar and, at the time of the incident, the bar had just closed. I'm currently in my 30s, and I suppose your average male living in the Midwestern United States. Regular job, regular life, and I simply hope for the best. Try to remain positive and try to live and let live. I do have one thing that, when brought up, turns me back into a frightened 4-year-old, shaking, stressed, and worried. The year was 1983. I was 4 years old, very happy and very trusting, until the fateful day I was made aware of this strange man. It was Thanksgiving, and we made the trip to visit my mother's side of the family. We were at her grandparents' house. At the time, I was an only child and, as a matter of fact, the only child there. I remember being bored after everyone had eaten and asked my dad to take me to a large, well-known park in the area. It stood out due to the fact that it had giant animals that were part of the park: a penguin with a slide in its stomach, an elephant you could climb up with the help of a ladder, a kangaroo that you could somehow bounce in. Anyways, you get the point. My dad jumped at the chance to get out of the house and away from everyone. He was a stranger here. There were in-laws he never really knew, cousins, aunts and uncles, great-grandparents, not to mention the friends of these people, all really tight-knit and knowing each other for years. We arrived at the park, and my first impression while pulling up was the number of kids running around. I noticed the occasional parent as well as keeping a watchful eye on their children. My dad told me that he would watch me from the car and to have fun with the other kids. I jumped out of the back seat and scrambled to the penguin first. I remember bonding with the other kids. I had, of course, never met any of them before, but kids seem to have a natural tendency to flock together, trust one another, and simply play. I was running around like most of the children, going from the slides to the swings, and eventually grew tired and sat on a bench. It had only been about 15 minutes since I had arrived and was planning on being there for several more hours. I then noticed him, a man that stood out. I could tell even as a 4-year-old that he did not belong here. He was dressed in a trench coat, a hat that matched, and kept looking around, staring at different kids. In my childlike mind, he resembled Inspector Gadget. I knew immediately what he was up to. He was looking for an unattended child. He then eyed me, my dad being in the car several hundred yards away. He made the mistaken assumption that I had somehow as a 4-year-old made it to the park alone. I was then on high alert. I tried to start playing again, but all the joy of the day had been sucked out by this creep. I went down a slide only to see that he had skulked over to me like a wraith, watching, waiting. I couldn't bear the tension or the fear, so I ran as fast as possible back to the safety of my father in the car. I jumped into the seat, head down so as to keep me hidden from his view. I told my dad I was ready to go back to my great-grandmother's house and was relieved as we started pulling away. My curiosity took over and I peeked my head above the back seat of the car and looked out the back window. He was there, looking directly at me and making a come here motion with his fingers, all the while smiling. I ducked even lower and remained that way until we arrived back at my grandparents' home. I have no reason why I failed to tell anyone what had happened, maybe a fear that it would somehow bring me closer to him or that I wouldn't be believed. I then forgot about this strange man, or at least didn't think that I would be seeing him again. Flash forward to 1986. My parents and I moved into a low-rent apartment. I am fine at first, everything's normal. I then noticed one day that our neighbors had moved out and that a new neighbor had moved in. One guess as to who it was. Everything came back to me in a flash. I freaked out, but for some reason kept it all in, not saying a word to anyone. I tried to avoid him and hoped that he wouldn't remember me from that brief moment a few years before. I was sadly mistaken. As soon as he saw me, I saw a look of recognition on his narrow face. I didn't play alone after that. As a matter of fact, I didn't go outside really unless my parents were with me. Several months had passed and of course I was still on the defensive, just waiting for the worst to happen. One day though, I noticed something odd. He had a boy with him, roughly my age and clearly scared. The child was rarely seen, and when seen, the man had a firm grasp on him at all times. My mother, not apparently picking up on the fact that this man was a sick freak, in my mind, the boogeyman, told me that I should go next door to his apartment and ask to play with what she thought was his son. No, never even thought of doing such an absurd thing and refused without telling her why. I remember seeing the boy a few times over the course of what had been weeks, and I always remember the look on his face. The fact that he wanted to tell me something, that he was afraid, it haunts me to this day, and even though I was just a child, I'm still filled with guilt for not saying anything. It was because I was afraid for my life, afraid of whatever that strange monster of a man wanted to do with me and boys like me. I last saw the boy in the man's car. It was an old ice cream-colored 60s model. The boy was crying and looked out of his mind. I stored this memory away and hid it, the darkest of the moment too big for my childlike mind to understand. Eventually, the beast moved away, and soon after, we did as well. I was growing up. Years had passed. I was a big boy, or so I thought. 3rd grade, maybe, and my parents had just taken pictures of me playing, being a kid, just regular family stuff. The man was lost in my memories, fading slowly, but of course never fully forgotten. The photos were developed by a local grocer. They were picked up and looked over and left on the dash of my parents' car. We then went to the park in my city, and it was summer. My parents and I got out of the car and did a tour of the park. The car windows were left down, no reason to suspect anything foul happening. I remember we were at the top of the park on a large rocky hill, and looking down, wouldn't you know who was there? The man, dressed in a long coat again, but much shabbier, trash-eating, looking quite disheveled and dirty. I remember being afraid, but happy in a strange way at seeing him so down and out, homeless and hungry. The guy then saunters over to my parents' car and looks in, reaches for something and makes off. It was the photos of me. My parents yelled and were upset, but as mentioned earlier, we were way above him. The hill we were on turned onto a sheer cliff. The drop was at least 30 feet. You would have to walk completely back around to catch him. My father tries, but by the time he got to the car, the fiend was gone. My dad came back to us. We drove home, my parents chalking it up to random chance. They had no memory of this man. They only saw a mental case, homeless and lost. I processed the whole thing and freaked knowing that he was still so close. Years had gone by and, of course, naturally, me think that he was gone or dead or at least not able to magically appear where I was and steal my photos. It was now 1989 and we live in a different house, same city. I'm much bigger and of course more aware of the world, the positives and the negatives. It was summer. My parents had spent a late night with their longtime friends. It was about 1 a.m. before we began making our way back home. I was wide awake, staring out the window, eating up the world's visuals with my eyes, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, was the stranger, once again dressed in the same getup as before. I almost shrieked in the back seat, but instead remained quiet and hid, praying that he didn't see me. I did notice, though, that he was walking rather quickly, as if he was on a mission to bring fear into the hearts of children everywhere. My parents take notice and comment on how odd it is that he's dressed in a winter coat and hat in the summertime, but don't seem to realize that this is the same man we'd seen seemingly out of nowhere countless times before. I believe that he didn't see me, and I sat up again as we made our way up to the street. We then saw her, a 13 or 14-year-old girl, crying and running like her life depended on it. She kept looking back, looking for someone or something. I knew what she was looking for, and I was afraid for her. I remember my parents asking if she needed help, a ride. She flatly refused any help and kept running. I don't know what she thought we were up to, but I'm guessing whatever the man said to her put true fear into her heart, and she wasn't going to trust anyone or anything at that moment. I never had another incident with this dark version of Inspector Gadget, and at times wonder what became of him. I sometimes feel the need to research the newspapers, internet, old phone books, anything to discover who he was and what he may have done to the boy I saw and maybe others. I usually begin looking but never find anything substantial. That may be by an unconscious choice though, as opposed to anything else. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear it featured here on the channel. And grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt.com. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.